Ryan Reynolds here for, I guess, my 100th Mint commercial. No, don't. No. I mean, honestly, when I started this, I thought I only have to do like 4 of these. I mean, it's unlimited premium wireless for $15 a month. How are there still people paying 2 or 3 times that much? I'm sorry, I shouldn't be victim blaming here. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/save. Whenever you're ready.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Invisible Hate. I'm Asad Butt.
And I'm Saadia Khan.
Saadia, how you doing? How's your week been?
I'm doing well, Asad. My week's been good. I was in New York City today to interview on this podcast called Brown Enough.
Oh, are you?
It's an interesting question.
Yeah.
I won't answer that,
Okay.
but hosted by Chris Rivas. He is an actor, author, and we had this wonderful conversation. But my thoughts are not about the podcast itself, but what I witnessed in the city. So the city was completely engulfed in smog from Canada wildfires. I don't know if you're following
that's
that.
happening. Yeah, that happens here in Portland as well.
Oh, wow. So this is the first time I have seen it in New York City. I've lived here for almost a decade and a half, and this is the first time I witnessed it. And you won't believe it, Asad. Amidst this hazy air, I saw some folks puffing on cigarettes.
Yeah. Hey, I mean, Saadia, the air quality, like Lahore, Karachi, I feel like you were probably right back at home. People smoking on didn't it feel like you were back home?
You're right. It did remind me of Lahore a bit because the sky was almost orange.
Oh my goodness.
But it was, this dystopian element to it because seeing it in New York is not something that I'm used to.
Yeah, when it happens here in Portland, it's like, oh my goodness, when we walk our dog, like my throat hurts and we just close the windows and we run the, air filter in the house. But yeah, it is brutal and it can last for days. So definitely, I hope you're staying indoors more than usual.
Unfortunately, no, because this week is really busy for me.
No.
I'm going for another interview to the city tomorrow.
Oh, wow.
And then to meet somebody on Friday. And this is the first week in a long time where I will be in the city more than usual. So it's a bit crazy for me.
Wow. So wait, you were first on Brown Enough. Is this one Pakistani Enough? What's this other podcast that you're on?
That's my podcast. That's Immigrantly.
Oh, I'm sorry. Immigrantly. Okay. Immigrant Enough.
That is Immigrantly Enough. And I'm interviewing somebody.
Oh, excellent. Okay, cool. Yeah. And if you haven't listened to Saadia's podcast, highly recommend. She does a great job interviewing people. So yeah, totally.
Oh, thank you, Asad. That was so sweet. But I want to know what you were doing this week and how was your week?
Oh, yeah. My week was good. Nothing crazy to report. I did binge one podcast series that my wife recommended to me called The Witch Trials of J.K. Rowling, which obviously everybody knows who she is. And it was a really fascinating kind of look at, obviously the controversial comments that J.K. Rowling has made about the trans community. And, it was investigating free speech and what it means to, kind of have an opinion and use your status as the world's most recognizable author,
right?
To shed light on this issue. And so yeah, I thought it was really well done, very interesting. Regardless of where you stand on that debate, it was really well done, and I highly recommend it.
That's good, Asad. Can I ask you where you stand on that debate?
I mean, I think my general position on most things is I'm all about more debate and more and less censorship, and so I fall in the lines of, I think that she's welcome to have her opinion. I don't necessarily fully agree with, where she stands, but I recognize where she's coming from, and I think it's important to have these debates. So I think, I'm still processing it, but I think that it's undeniable the impact that her comments have had on the trans community and whatnot. So I think I'm still processing it, but I generally fall on the side of more debate and discussion is better than less. Oh, and those are my two dogs behind me, and they agree. Where do you stand?
Right. I am not sure how to frame this, but I feel if free speech is harmful to somebody's existence, then it's not worth having that point of view, or at least discussing it in public, especially when you have this huge platform, right?
Yeah.
So to me, somebody's humanity takes precedence over your right to have free speech. And that is my understanding of what free speech entails and what it should entail. But I'm sure there are a lot of people who would disagree with that.
Yeah. No, it's a complicated issue, and that's why I think people should listen to the podcast and judge for themselves and recognize that it does come with a certain point of view. Clearly the title feels strongly about one position.
That's what I was thinking.
But I do think that regardless, it was really well done. It brings about both viewpoints. It really challenges J.K. Rowling on her stances and asks, what it would take for her to change her opinion, which I think for a lot of us, it's hard for us, once we've committed to a position to change. And I think all of us have to kind of keep an open mind about, as new facts are presented or as different, thoughts are emerging, that maybe, the positions that we're stuck in should change. And so, that's how we all progress. And I will get off my soapbox now. And maybe we can go on to today's story, Saadia.
Absolutely.
On May 17, 2017, Jimmy Smith-Kramer and about 10 friends are celebrating his 20th birthday in Washington's Olympic Park. They're at the Donkey Creek Campground, a local watering hole. Smith-Kramer and his friends are all Native Americans and members of the Quinault Nation. They're hanging out and just drinking around a fire that night. And at around 1:30 in the morning, a white Chevy pickup truck with an extended cab, large tires, and 4 strangers inside screeches onto the site. The pickup truck starts doing donuts on the patch of gravel nearby. Saadia, do you know what donuts are?
I don't, Asad. Oh, no, I do. It's like circles, right?
Exactly. Round circles that a lot of people like to do for fun and in parking lots and whatnot. And so, some of the campers, including someone named Harvey Anderson, yell at the driver to stop. It's obviously pretty disruptive. And the driver doesn't listen, and he continues to drive recklessly. And then all of a sudden, kind of this argument or this discussion that they're having escalates. A can of beer is thrown out of the truck, and a rock is thrown at the truck at some point, breaking a window. Allegedly, slurs are being yelled at the campers, and the front passenger is heard yelling at the driver to stop. Suddenly, the truck starts reversing towards Anderson, directly towards him. Smith-Kramer jumps up to try and push Anderson out of harm's way, but both of them end up getting hit by the truck. The driver then puts the car in drive and runs over the 2 young men again and peels out of the campsite.
Oh no.
Anderson survives, but with critical injuries, including road rash, a bruised lung, and a cracked rib and sternum. He's released the next day, but unfortunately Smith-Kramer, who took the bulk of the hit, is put on life support and dies 11 days later.
Asad, this is so sad. Something so simple being escalated to a point where a precious life is lost. It's just so sad.
Yeah, and I feel like this happens time and time again in these stories. It's like all of a sudden it goes from 0 to 100. And then, because people have some sort of deadly weapon, in this case a truck, at their possessions, they do something that's just so rash. It's really ridiculous.
You're right, Asad, but without stereotyping, I am curious, why are men always angry?
I don't know. I'm not sure how to comment on that. I think you're right. Does that have to do with our testosterone or, other things, environmental factors? Yeah, I agree. I mean, do you have a theory?
I don't. I wish I did.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of the perpetrators in our stories are men, and that seems to be the case, nationwide and worldwide as well.
Absolutely. By the way, Asad, I've never heard of the Quinault Nation. Can you tell me a little more about them? How was their relationship with the surrounding community?
Yeah, that's a great question. I had actually never heard of them as well, even though I live up here in the Pacific Northwest. There are about 3,000 citizens of the Quinault Indian Nation. about 1,400 of which live on the reservation. And the reservation is actually pretty sizable, about 190,000 acres.
Wow.
It's mostly rainforest and borders the Pacific Ocean to the west and the Olympic Mountains to the east. It actually sounds pretty majestic, and I feel like I want to add it to the list of places to go. The word Quinault comes from the name of the tribe's largest settlement, and the Quinault are known for their fishing, woodworking, environmentalism, and female leadership, actually.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah. Quinault Indian Nation is, however, an economically and ecologically depressed area. Just last year, in fact, the Biden administration and FEMA awarded about $30 million to them to help them move their two villages about a mile to higher ground and rebuild infrastructure. There's also been friction between the native population and local population in Grays Harbor County, which has been going on for generations, and it's primarily over fishing and timber rights. The Quinault have been shot at over legal disputes and have filed claims against school authorities for rampant discrimination against Native children. And, I just want to note that the Quinault have their own police force who actually train alongside everyone else at the Basic Law Enforcement Academy, which is the only police academy in Washington. And interestingly, a former Quinault police chief said training on hate crimes was actually super limited. And get this, Saadia, officials who oversee police training confirmed that new recruits spend about a half an hour on hate crimes.
Oh my gosh.
Isn't that crazy?
That is bizarre.
Less than what one episode of what we do is how much they spend officially training on hate crimes, which is kind of wild. So let's keep in mind that Smith-Kramer's death is set in the context of this kind of long-time tension between the two communities, as well as skepticism by the native population that justice is going to be served if they report crimes perpetrated by the white community, things that we've talked about a lot on this podcast.
And I said, I'm not surprised, right?
Yeah.
Because when the judicial system or law enforcement are skewed in one direction, then the people who are at the receiving end of it do feel violated, and they don't trust law enforcement and the authorities.
Totally, yeah.
Right. Can we go back to the crime? Are there any more details, Asad?
Yeah, Saadia, it's actually pretty gruesome what happened. So Smith-Kramer's skull is partially crushed and blood is coming from his mouth after he got hit. What's sad is that there's no cell service to call for help in this area. So a neighboring camper helps put Smith-Kramer into his truck and drive towards the main road to call an ambulance. And he said, and I quote, "My fingers were inside his skull as I tried to get him into my car. His chest felt like mush when I tried to resuscitate him." End quote.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So both Smith-Kramer and Anderson are transported to Grays Harbor Community Hospital and then Tacoma General Hospital over an hour away. Back at the scene, it's dark and the driver has fled, and the campers can't identify who it is. Police eventually release a description of the truck and start to look for the suspect. And the Quinault Nation itself offers a reward for someone who knows the suspect to come forward and also help with the prosecution. Police actually begin interviewing witnesses, of which there are over a dozen, and there are very, disparate accounts of what happened, Saadia, which we'll get to in a little bit. But luckily, 2 weeks later, thanks to a tip, the driver is identified and arrested. He's 31-year-old James Walker, a white man from a nearby lumber town called Holcomb. It turns out that Walker's wife and two friends were also in the truck at the time of the hit and run. They're all between the ages of 27 and 30, and they're all from that town, Holcomb. And then, basically, since the crime happened, Walker had been hiding out. He'd been attempting to repair his truck with parts stolen from an auto shop, and he actually threw out those tires that he was doing donuts with into the Holcomb River. And according to police, he also cut his hair and shaved his goatee. And then, when they finally get him and arrest him, he claims that he was hoping to run into someone he knew at the campsite. That's why he was there. He said that he pulled into Smith-Kramer's campground, and then he was confronted by the campers, and his truck was pelted with rocks. That's what he says. And then he says to escape, he put his vehicle in reverse and floored the gas, hitting the young men by accident. Walker, though, admitted to drinking that evening, but said he wasn't drunk. And he also maintained that he wouldn't have committed a hate crime against Native Americans because he is, get this, part Cherokee.
Oh my God, Asad. This is a new twist in the story. But do we know if that's true, if he's telling the truth? What do you think?
Yeah, I couldn't find any verification, and, but the other thing is that nobody's really disputing it. But according to Walker himself, his great-grandmother was full Cherokee, but she never enrolled his father into a federally recognized tribe because back then you didn't want to be known as Native American. As for his criminal background, he's been arrested 7 times since 2005, mostly for minor charges, including reckless driving. He had also spent 6 weeks in jail after a conviction for theft in the 2nd degree. And just to note, he's never been charged with a violent crime.
Yeah, so this is quite interesting, right? So we see that this person is between the ages of 27 and 30, something that we've seen throughout cases that we've covered. Perpetrators are often young. They have some kind of criminal record, even though it may be some minor charges, but that record exists in some cases, or at least in most cases. So we are seeing similar pattern in other cases that we've covered as well.
Agreed. And this idea of people just kind of going out for a joyride, and then all of a sudden they come across people and incidents happen and tensions rise. Yeah, it seems like we've seen this story play out before across the country in different stories.
Right. So, Asad, let's take a quick break, and when we come back, we learn more about the victims. Welcome back to Invisible Hate. So what about our victims, Asad? Tell us more about that.
Yeah. So Smith-Kramer was raised by his uncle after his mother unfortunately committed suicide when he was just 4. By all accounts, he grew up to be an extraordinary, fun-loving, and generous young man who excelled at everything. He loved the outdoors and hunting, but his main passion was basketball. His uncle taught him to play basketball and coached him in high school, where he was the star of the team. And basketball was one of the only outlets for fun in that tiny town, and it was a huge affair on the reservation. Everyone would come out with pots of chili and watch the high school games together. And during Smith-Kramer's sophomore year, actually, the team made it all the way to the state championship, and then the tribe actually chartered buses across Washington for anyone wanting to attend. And unfortunately, they lost by 1 point in that final, but still a pretty awesome experience. His dream was to play college ball at Haskell Indian Nations University, an all-native college in Kansas that I actually didn't even know existed. But that dream was dashed after a dispute with the other schools in the high school league and subsequent dissolution of the native league.
Oh no.
Instead, he became a commercial crab fisherman after graduation. He helped to coach the high school team, and he was planning to attend community college and play there. He was also a father, Saadia, having twins
That's so sad.
with his girlfriend after high school, who were 2 when he died. The other victim, Anderson, who survived, was 19 at the time and from nearby Aberdeen. There wasn't so much information about him, but he did tell a local news station that Smith-Kramer had sacrificed himself. He said that when the car started going in reverse, quote, Jimmy turned around and ran and tried to save me, tried to get me out of the way.
That's so tragic, Asad, but at the same time, so heroic, right? He was trying to save somebody else's life.
Of course, yeah. I mean, for that to be your last action, on Earth is pretty remarkable for sure. So back to Walker, he's initially charged with first-degree manslaughter, which carries a possible life sentence. He's also charged with vehicular assault, hit-and-run death, and hit-and-run injury. Walker pleaded not guilty at the arraignment, and the bail was set at $750,000 as he was deemed a flight risk. It was also being investigated as a hate crime, Saadia. But accounts varied quite a bit and triggered a contentious back and forth between law enforcement and the Native community. First, there were a lot of discrepancies as to how long the exchange was between Walker and campers, when they first arrived.
Right.
And then it was unclear if the rock was thrown before or after the men were run over. And then also there was kind of discrepancies about whether the slurs were yelled from the truck or not. Most of the witnesses said that they did not hear slurs, but one of them, Markel Waugh, reports hearing war whoops, those ones that are meant to demean Native Americans. 5 days after the incident, 2 Hispanic high school students who were camping nearby came forward and said that the driver had come to their campsite asking for alcohol and cigarettes, and then that he headed towards Smith-Kramer's plot, and that's where they heard someone say, quote, "River N-word," and, quote, "We took your land, so remember that." 2 really just horrible things to say. Because the 2 students couldn't report who said what or exactly what was said, detectives said it was inconclusive in determining the driver's intention. 11 days after the incident, Quinault Nation actually published a press release titled "What Really Happened at Donkey Creek," and in it they make reference to the slurs and the war calls being screamed when the men were hit. It said, and I quote, "If it is in fact determined that this was a hate crime, it will add even more distress and sadness to our loss of this outstanding young man and the injury of another."
That is true, Asad, because when it becomes a hate crime, then it is not just one person, but the entire community that in a way is targeted, right?
100%.
But I want to go back to what the Quinault Nation published in their press release. And I wonder, how did they get hold of this information?
Yeah, so that's a great point. So Quinault's tribal president, Fawn Sharp, actually said that the account in the press release was a first-hand account from a tribal youth, that person was there and relayed to them, her eyewitness observation. To say that that's not evidence, then basically you're saying that, this young person made it up. And he's like, our young people don't make up this shit.
Right.
They don't lie. And, I think the sheriff's office or the police, they told the AP that they couldn't find one person, including the surviving victim, who was able to tell us that there were any actual racial slurs thrown out during the incident. So, there was this discrepancy that was happening. Like, clearly some people that were there said that, something happened, racial slurs were said, and then the police weren't able to kind of confirm that in their interviews.
You're absolutely right. I said a lot of discrepancies, and I wonder if the information was deliberately withheld by the police.
I mean, that's a serious question. And, what I will say is that, some of the police members, as we'll get to, were trying to do their best to figure out what happened. And Quinault members actually also claimed that some witnesses that had been questioned at the hospital were only questioned there, and they weren't probed about the hate crime and should be interviewed again. And so after this press release goes out, police actually do, interview witnesses again, some of them even 3 times. And Waugh, the witness who reported the war whoops, was actually pressed on the matter. And then he actually, after I'm assuming heavy questioning, conceded that it could have just been drunk hollering. So.
Right. So, Asad, I'm curious, how did Washington define hate crimes? Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Basically, the state defines hate crimes as malicious harassment, so intentionally committing or threatening to commit physical injury or damage based on a person's race, religion, national origin, gender, sexual orientation, or ability. It doesn't have to be premeditated, just targeting victims for their identity. And so, what ends up happening, Saadia, ultimately, is that Grays Harbor County prosecutor Katie Sabovita chose not to pursue hate crime charges. She said that hate would have been easier to establish as a motive had the suspect known the victims, and that third and fourth hand accounts would have been inadmissible in court.
I said I don't agree with that, because by definition, hate crime is not just the actual identity of the victim, but also perceived. So I don't think the perpetrator needs to know who the victim is if they perceive them to be of a certain national origin, racial identity. That would amount to a hate crime as well.
And according to what we just described as the law, it's just the targeting the victims for identity. There's no clause in there that says you have to know them beforehand.
Right.
So Saadia, the chief deputy of investigation, said he was sensitive to the idea that these campers could have been targeted and that they, quote, really dove into the racial component, but that the information was third hand and it just didn't pan out as a hate crime.
I'm curious to know what they mean by really dove into. What did they do? What steps did they take? Did they share that information with, members of Quinault Nation to put their suspicions to rest?
They have 30 minutes of training on hate crimes, so it must have been a really, really deep dive into it, right?
Yeah, you're right, Asad.
So, the prosecutor, Sabovita, said cases involving possible hate crimes were extremely rare, but that the sheriff's department took it really seriously. For what it's worth, one of the lead detectives was experienced in police work, but not hate crimes.
And yet they took it very seriously.
Right. And, unfortunately, the lack of hate crime charges was said to disappear from the media rather quickly and without consequence, which I think we know happens a lot. But that said, ProPublica, journalists from there, did a deep dive into the case in 2018 and said it was quite complex, but concluded that there was some evidence of a racial bias. They cited the two witnesses confirming that the, quote, river N-word was used by Walker's group. Regardless, what law enforcement and the native population seemed to agree on was that the running over was intentional. So, that was pretty clear. Walker's defense team was willing to plead guilty to manslaughter in the second degree, but only if the sentence didn't exceed 7.5 years. So the prosecutor and the lead investigator met with nearly 50 of Smith-Kramer's family members and friends to discuss this plea offer, which was, obviously really heated, because I think, as I mentioned earlier, the first degree manslaughter, if he was convicted of that, the maximum sentence is life. But given Walker's nonviolent past, lawyers estimated that he'd really only get 11 to 13 years if convicted. And so the family was really torn, Saadia, and didn't necessarily trust a jury to justly punish a white man killing a native man.
Not surprising.
Yeah,
yes.
not surprising at all. And so in the end, they agreed to the plea deal. It's also just want to note that the prosecutor said that the three others in the truck would be charged for their parts either in the incident or because of the cover-up.
Oh my gosh, I completely forgot there was a cover-up as well.
Yeah, they didn't come forward for a long time, right? And they saw this happen. So Smith-Kramer's uncle and guardian, stated that both sides were really getting ugly, which his nephew would not have wanted to have happen. He said, and I quote, "Our belief is that Jim would have not wanted this to go on." And he also said that he hoped that Walker would be rehabilitated.
Yeah.
In the end, Walker pleaded guilty to second-degree manslaughter, 2 counts of hit and run with injury, and 2 counts of vehicular assault, and he was sentenced to the maximum of 7.5 years in prison. And Walker said in court, and I quote, "I am responsible for this. I pray for the families to heal. I realize he has children who will never know him, and he will never know the joy of being a father. All I can do is beg for mercy and say to the family, I am very sorry."
Yeah, I can see that he's remorseful, Asad, but we will never know what his intention was at the time the crime was committed, right? And that is always the tricky or frustrating part of a lot of hate crimes because they are based on intent and we can never fully know somebody else's intent, right?
Yeah, I don't disagree.
Okay, Asad, let's take a quick break and we'll be back with more information on this case. Welcome back to Invisible Hate. So, do we think this is a hate crime, Asad?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I think let's going back to the facts. I think it really stems on whether or not you believe, the two witnesses that racial slurs were being tossed around before they were run over, right? And I think that,
right.
Getting back to what the tribal chief, said in the press release, you have to trust the people that were there, right? And so if they said that they saw that happen beforehand, for me, that's pretty clear that, that this was a hate crime. And so in other cases that we've covered, it's clear when the perpetrator has posted on Facebook for, years or decades about, hate and all this kind of stuff. It doesn't seem to be like that. And so it's tough.
100% Asad, because we know that running over Kramer was intentional.
Right.
We know that.
Totally.
What we don't know is would Walker had acted or reacted the same way if Kramer was not Native American.
Yeah.
And that's where I am unable to make a determination one way or the other. And hence, it's very difficult for me to conclude that this was a hate crime. But at the end of the day, a precious, precious life was lost. And we are here to honor that life, that young life, which was lost due to this very unfortunate incident.
Yeah. I'd be interested to know what our listeners think. I would love for you guys to share your thoughts on this one, because I do think this is one of the tougher ones for us to kind of, determine. And especially also, I just remember that, he claims that he was also part Native. And so, then there's that whole, can you commit a hate crime against someone who's of your own race or faith or sexual orientation, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, but the interesting thing is Quinault Nation doesn't see him as part Native, right? They keep referring to him as a white man.
Right.
So that's an interesting irony there.
Totally agree.
So Asad, what is the latest and how can we help?
So Smith-Kramer's high school jersey was retired, his number 5, and the team actually wore the number 5 on their shoulders through the next season. And, his son, Smith-Kramer's son, actually plays basketball now, which is really, really sweet to hear. Saadia, we couldn't find any articles on what happened to the truck's passengers, if anything, those other people that were in the car and didn't, report what happened afterwards. As for Jimmy, you can read more about him on the Facebook page made for him, and so we link to that in our show notes. And then you can also check out ProPublica's Documenting Hate Project, which recorded hate crimes nationally following Trump's election through 2019. And Saadia, I just want to end with a few stats that our researchers found. So in 2016, so a year before this happened, police reports in Washington indicated that American Indians / Alaska Natives make up about 2% of the state's population, but accounted for 7% of race-based hate incidents.
Wow.
They are the 4th largest group of bias victims, though hate crimes rarely gets reported because authorities aren't trusted, which we talk about a lot. And despite the prosecutor's remark about Walker not knowing the victims, the vast majority of hate crimes involve people previously unknown to each other. So Saadia, any takeaways?
Asad, we see this through line, recurring theme, right? Where we've said this so many times. Hate crimes are much more than one person's deaths or assault, harassment. It's a community that suffers. And in this case, we've seen that. And I'm not surprised that these hate crimes are not reported or not prosecuted the way they should be. And I really, really hope that our podcast and the hate crimes that we are discussing here can shed some light on what's happening in America and how bad the situation is when it comes to hate crimes against minorities.
Yeah, I think that's really well said, Saadia. And, I think that also, as you mentioned, the victims go so many levels deep. It's certainly, his family, his 2 kids. This is my daughter Isha talking, and so, I can't even imagine, not being in her life, as she grows up. And so I really feel for, the kids not knowing their dad, but then also, the entire Quinault Nation. Like, clearly he was well known in the community and someone that has had a really promising future. And just,
and I said he was only 20.
Only 20.
He was
so young.
Only
so
20.
young.
So young. Anyways, this case was very difficult to listen to and sit through, but I hope whoever is listening can take away something positive in terms of how they view other people, those who don't look like them.
Well said.
As always, thank you all for tuning in to Invisible Hate. If you want to learn more, check out links in the show notes about the case. Please email us your thoughts on this story or any other story that you think we should cover. You can reach us at info@invisiblehatepodcast.com. You can also tweet us or hit us up on Instagram. Just search for Invisible Hate Podcast. Thanks again for listening. Please give us a 5-star review. Share this story with a friend or a family member who may benefit from this story, may see humanity in other people. Invisible Hate is a joint production of Rifilion Media and Immigrantly. We would like to thank our team, which includes Michaela Strother, Emmanuel Monahan, Lindsay Gambo, and Paroma Chakravarti. Our music was done by Simon Hutchinson. We'll be back next week with another hate crime for us to analyze. Until next time, I am Saadia Khan.
And I'm Asad Bhatt.